tough veteran who has endured the rigors of war finally decides to return to his homeland. He makes a long journey on foot from Laos to Moscow, but while passing through a small town, he accidentally breaks the unwritten rule there. A strange rule that says you can ask questions but not answer. Two low-ranking police officers then stop him and demand his papers. When one of the police officers inspected his belongings, one of them became suspicious when he saw something under the man's leather jacket. The man quickly opened his jacket and revealed a dagger, which immediately panicked the two officers. Although the man explained that he had permission to carry the knife, the officers still forced him to hand it over. After inspection, it turned out to be a kukri, a knife typical of the Nepalese army, and without further ado, the officers immediately handcuffed him. After making sure the area was quiet, one of the police officers then hit him with a baton, and unexpectedly, the veteran with extraordinary reflexes managed to avoid it. Another police officer then also tried to attack, and it was seen that the man only shifted his body slightly and then pushed him until he fell. Realizing their opponent was not just anyone, the two of them took out their pistols and forced him into the car. The veteran did not want to prolong the problem, and he finally got in obediently. But suddenly, the police officer again tried to hit his back with a baton. Strangely, the man did not complain at all, but only stared with a cold look that made the two of them unaware that their actions would cause disaster. At the police station, his belongings were confiscated, and the veteran was handcuffed again. It was a police station, but the atmosphere was more like a criminal's den. The officers there could cause trouble and extort people under the pretext of protection money, which they then shared with their men. A captain then entered the cell and asked why the man was silent, but the veteran remained silent. The captain then became furious and hit him with a club, causing him to cry out in pain. The more stubborn the man became, the more violent the captain became. Afterward, the captain pressed the club to his face and shouted at him to answer. But the veteran only glared back contemptuously, and feeling challenged, the captain became even more brutal. He hit him repeatedly and then took out his electric baton. But this time the veteran fought back, kicking the captain in the leg and knocking him down. The captain tried to get up, but several other police officers immediately arrived to stop the commotion. Without realizing it, the captain had just put his own life in danger. The police then immediately took him to the office of the deputy police chief, Rodionov. Seeing the sharp kukri knife, he asked why the man was carrying it, and the veteran calmly replied with only one word: enemy. But this answer was taken by them as a joke. Shortly afterward, the police chief Gavrilov entered the room, and among all the officers, he was the only one who seemed to have any sense of reason. He then ordered the handcuffs removed and checked the man's identity. They were shocked to learn his name was Samanov, a major in special forces. Upon learning this, the officers who had previously tortured him appeared remorseful, fearing retaliation, and afterward they immediately returned Samanov's belongings. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, but soon after, Gavrilov made a fatal mistake when he played music from Samanov's MP3 player. Samanov then left the room and passed a beautiful girl who felt like she had seen him before. After leaving the gate, he realized he'd left his beloved MP3 player behind. It meant a lot to him, always keeping him company during times of sadness. He returned to find Gavrilov harassing the girl. Seeing the girl cornered, her face desperate, Samanov initially remained silent, picking up the MP3 player and calmly unwinding the cord. But as Gavrilov approached, Samanov clamped the player between his fingers and turned around. Suddenly, a hard blow struck Gavrilov's head, and Gavrilov fell to the ground helpless. Without hesitation, Samanov grabbed the ashtray, unplugged the phone, put away the lighter, and pulled Nastya out of the room. He walked calmly as if nothing had happened, but when a police officer was about to enter the room, the ashtray flew straight into his head. Seeing Samanov holding the telephone cable, the police panicked, and afterwards they tried to point their guns at him, but with a simple trick they were defeated one by one. Meanwhile, Nastya was stunned to see this, not expecting a special forces soldier to defeat the police so easily. Before leaving, Samanov dismantled and scattered all the weapons in the police station, then invited Nastya to leave. However, they ended up entering a bathroom filled with evil police officers. Samanov then pushed Nastya out and proceeded to beat the police officers. Samanov then met Nastya again after it was safe, but at the foot of the stairs they had to face the deputy police chief. Before he could attack, Samanov had already incapacitated him with just 3 quick movements, and it was clear that if Samanov used his fighting methods, no police officer would survive. Upon arriving outside the police station, Samanov lit a cigarette for a police officer with the chief's lighter. Meanwhile, Nastya was still trembling, her eyes teary, and she realized that she had dragged Samanov into great danger. If caught, Samanov would surely be tortured to death, so she begged him to leave her and get out of town. Meanwhile, the captain who had been beaten earlier had regained consciousness and, filled with vengeance, ordered several of his subordinates to hunt down Samanov. Nastya didn't want Samanov to get into any more danger, but the police car suddenly started chasing them. Samanov was forced to speed up his motorcycle while the police fired indiscriminately. Fortunately, Samanov nimbly dodged and performed a dangerous maneuver to turn onto a small road, and in the end, all of the police shots missed. Samanov then rode his motorcycle down the slope, jumped into the air, and ran toward a bulldozer. Meanwhile, the captain ran out of rifle bullets and tried his pistol, but still none of the bullets hit their target. As the police officers attempted to flee in search of reinforcements by car, the bulldozer driven by Samanov rammed into the front of their vehicle. The captain then ordered the driver to reverse, but a truck suddenly crashed into them from behind, and ultimately the police car exploded in a blaze of fire. The police station was in an uproar over the incident, while the police chief himself was overcome with fear, wondering what kind of people they were up against. In the end, it was revealed that their opponents were Maroon Beret Special Forces soldiers who had carried out high-level secret missions. Samanov had even received 2 medals for his service to the country and an award for his bravery. Now Samanov is moving through the mountains. He realizes that the police will not let him go just like that, and he intends that if the police want to fight further, he is ready to fight them to the end. Unfortunately, the police chief does not know that his decision has dragged his entire force to destruction. Let's see how a Maroon Beret soldier faces a police station with only war tricks and not a single bullet. Samanov was now in a restricted area of the forest, and during his search he found matchboxes, used electrical wires, rusty nails, and pieces of wood. Meanwhile, the police were still complaining about having to camp out in the rain to chase Samanov, and they didn't know that Samanov was assembling the most deadly weapon. Samanov then tied nails to the ends of wooden sticks with wire and set them on fire to make them stick firmly, and so became a weapon like a trident, which he would attach at various points. Not stopping there, Samanov then entered a small wooden house to search for anything useful, including a circular metal plate and a secret passage. Once everything was ready, he sat quietly, playing his favorite MP3 player, waiting for his enemies to fall into his trap. That night, 2 drunken police officers dared to move without a team, planning to exploit the darkness of the forest to set up an ambush, hoping to capture Samanov and claim a reward. As they passed through the trees, they saw the light of a fire in the distance, and to their surprise, they realized their target was so easy to find. They immediately turned off their vehicle's lights and approached slowly from behind, quickly making their way to the small wooden house. The first reckless police officer was about to break in, but was suddenly struck by a wooden plank, sending him reeling. His partner rushed over, but was immediately greeted with a hard kick from Samanov. He then tried to fight back, but was knocked down after being hit with a log. Interestingly, Samanov had no intention of killing them, and instead he simply gathered firewood and then forced the 2 police officers to handcuff each other near the campfire. Both were still confused and didn't even understand what had just happened to them, and afterwards Samanov calmly left a message for them to convey to their superiors to stop chasing him. The next morning, the police chief discovered that the guards assigned to monitor Samanov had disappeared. Without wasting any time, he immediately mobilized all his forces to move faster, and as soon as they found the wooden house, they immediately stormed it. But instead of finding Samanov, All they found were their own colleagues sitting inside the wooden house with bruised faces. Then one of the police officers boasted that he had almost managed to capture Simonov, when it was clear that this was just a trick. Afterwards, he conveyed a message to the police that they should no longer pursue Simonov, and the police chief, upon hearing this, became even more furious and immediately slapped him in the face. In order to speed up the search, the police chief ordered his troops to form a line and comb a wider area. While the police struggled to move through the forest, Simonov moved as nimbly as a fish in water. Then suddenly, two police officers were caught in traps one after the other. Simonov quickly grabbed the trident he had prepared, threw it right on target, then immediately changed position. The commotion caused the troops to panic and shoot indiscriminately, almost hitting their own comrades. The chase had barely begun, and 3 men were already down. And of course, to Simonov, they were nothing more. Simonov's shadow seemed to haunt every corner of the forest, and soon the tridents returned and impaled them. The police chief immediately led the manhunt, but now they were up against a guerrilla warfare expert. The forest was Simonov's home, and he could easily camouflage himself from the enemy's view. Moments later, Simonov again subdued the police officers who were tending to their wounded comrade. When other police officers arrived to check, they found that the weapons had been dismantled and Simonov knives were attached to their bodies. He did not kill them, but only ordered them to disperse their colleagues back to the car and forbade them from returning. On the other hand, the police chief led his troops to a narrow wooden suspension bridge. The deputy police chief blamed him for not involving the special forces and instead sacrificing the lives of his members. This remark only made the police chief more emotional, and in his anger, he ordered his deputy to go first. The bridge, made of only 2 tree trunks, was dangerous, as one wrong step could cause a fall into the river. Simonov was waiting for them there, and afterwards they fired shot after shot, but none of them hit him. The slow-moving deputy police chief finally fell, becoming the first victim to die. This time the police chief tried to play it smart, deciding that if he couldn't find Simonov, he would wait for him to come to him. Sure enough, as Simonov ran through the forest, the police chief suddenly appeared, blocking his path. Fortunately, Simonov was ready with his trident. The two then attacked simultaneously, and the police chief was seriously injured. Cold sweat poured down his face, and he nearly lost his life. As he stepped carefully on the wooden floor, wary of hidden weapons above, he did not realize that Simonov was standing right behind him. A fierce battle then ensued between firearms and knives, police and special forces. After that, the police chief then returned outside the forest with a gasp. There someone was waiting for him, and his anger grew when he saw a man wearing sunglasses standing before him. It turned out that the man was Colonel Dmitri from the Defense Intelligence Agency and Simonov's trainer. He then said that no one understood Simonov better than him, and that only if something extraordinary happened could Simonov lose control like now. Dmitri then advised the police chief to stop and forget about their pursuit. It was a golden opportunity that Simonov still gave them so they could live, because if Simonov really wanted to kill them, no one would get out of the forest alive. Unfortunately, the arrogant and stubborn police chief ignored him and instead drove Colonel Dmitri away. The police chief then received word that the helicopter requested to assist in capturing Simonov would arrive in 15 minutes. He immediately ordered all his forces to surround the area to ensure Simonov couldn't escape. He even personally entered the forest again to remove Simonov. As soon as the sound of rotor blades was heard, Simonov was forced to hide, and because his opponent had aerial advantage, his only option was to keep running to avoid the barrage of bullets. A steep cliff lay before him, and without hesitation he jumped. From above, it looked as if Simonov had been shot, but the police chief was still not satisfied and ordered the helicopter driver to comb the water surface until the fuel ran out. After drifting for a long time, an old man found Simonov on the shore of the lake. He was taken home and cared for, and it turned out that the old man's granddaughter was Nastya, the girl Simonov had rescued from the police station the previous day. Seeing his dying condition, Nastya was overcome with guilt because all this had happened because of her. And after being given treatment, the old man managed to remove the bullet from Simonov's body, while Nastia bravely stitched up his wound. That night, Simonov planned to leave so as not to put them in danger. But Nastia decided to go along, knowing that if Simonov were caught, his life would be over. Simonov was too weak, so they opted to spend the night in a thatched hut. The next day, the grandfather's house was visited by a gang of armed criminals, and without a word, they killed him on the spot. They turned out to be dangerous fugitives being hunted by the police, and hearing the gunshots, Simonov immediately prepared for battle. He then gave Nastia a dagger and then pretended to be weak to approach the group. Meanwhile, Nastia, who was hiding, was discovered by one of the criminals. Nastia fought back brutally, eventually stabbing him with the dagger multiple times. The gentle girl slowly turns into a fierce figure and is finally forced to kill in order to survive. Meanwhile, Simonov succeeded in paralyzing the criminals, then followed Nastia to the warehouse and found Nastia with her face covered in blood. Not long after other criminals arrived, a fierce battle ensued, and even though his opponent's body was larger, Simonov's fighting abilities were slightly superior. Simonov then grabbed the scythe that was there and drove it into his opponent's heart. From that moment on, Simonov no longer held back and went into killing mode, eliminating anyone who got in his way. Soon after, the police and special forces arrived, and upon seeing the 5 bodies of the criminals, the police chief realized that Simonov was still alive. The police chief then arrested Nastia to lure Simonov out of hiding, but they were unaware that Simonov had been watching them closely. As the police chief was about to shoot, Nastia pushed him away, giving Simonov time to disappear. The Special Forces commander arrived just in time and scolded the police chief, allowing Nastia to finally escape torture. Simonov's superior now gave a new order, capture Simonov alive, and he was chased to an abandoned building. Initially, Simonov wanted to surrender, but the enemy continued to attack him with electric weapons. In the end, Simonov was forced to fight, and in an instant, the best Special Forces fighter was successfully incapacitated. Even his own commander was easily incapacitated. However, Simonov refused to kill innocent people. He then helped his commander, who had fallen into the water and escaped through a pipe. Unfortunately, the police chief was waiting at the exit. The police chief's troops surrounded him tightly, but their shots all missed. Simonov jumped into a wooden house and the battle resumed. Strangely, despite being rained on by bullets, the house remained standing. Annoyed, the police chief launched a rocket to burn the house down. The police chief was convinced that Simonov was now dead, unaware that Simonov had taken refuge in the basement. At that moment, the Special Forces general visited the Special Forces commander, who was being treated at the hospital. Shortly thereafter, Nastia suddenly rushed into the room, and from Nastia's story, the Special Forces general slowly began to understand the entire incident that had befallen Simonov. Meanwhile, when the police chief returned to his office, he found Colonel Dmitri waiting for him there. Dmitri was also waiting for Simonov's arrival so that he could leave with him, because he felt that only by staying by the police chief's side could he wait for Simonov's arrival. Colonel Dmitri also advised the police chief to drink more alcohol, even finishing it off, so that when Simonov returned to retrieve his MP3 player, he would not feel afraid. On the other side, the police discovered a secret tunnel, and as soon as they descended the stairs, guns were pointed directly at them. Then, dressed in a police uniform, Simonov calmly walked to the car and took the driver's cell phone. As soon as the driver got out, he knocked him unconscious and stole the car. 2 police officers who tried to get into the car to chase him were also beaten to the ground by Simonov. Meanwhile, a guard eating noodles while watching TV was startled when the door was suddenly smashed open by a car. The target was clear. Simonov had found the police chief, and Special Forces had already surrounded their location. Colonel Dmitri then entered the room and informed Simonov that a large force was waiting outside. Only the tanks had not yet arrived. He attempted to persuade Simonov to surrender and return with him to Moscow, but Simonov refused enraged. He couldn't stand watching people being slowly strangled and forced to submit to corrupt police. For him, that was how every citizen in this city felt. They were no ordinary people, nor were they even fortress dwellers. They had a responsibility for their own lives and for the world. Otherwise, the sacrifices of their comrades would be in vain, dying for the scum of society. To his surprise, Simonov released the police chief and then sat quietly in a room preparing to face the special forces. At that moment, the special forces general arrived on the scene and ordered all troops to retreat. However, as they were about to arrest the chief suddenly took Nastya hostage. With a big head, the chief considered himself the most deserving, boasting about what he had done for the city. As hope filled the room, Simonov then reappeared, having vented all his anger. The chief finally released Nastya and surrendered, realizing that if he killed someone, he still wouldn't be able to escape from that place. From then on, the small town returned to peace. And on the orders of their superiors, Simonov and Colonel Dmitri prepared to return to Moscow. Nastya, who had fallen in love with Simonov, finally had to accept his departure and could only watch Simonov's car slowly disappear from her sight. And so the film ended.